Hey everybody, Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here. Time to talk about the tropics. We're getting into that time of year where we start keeping an eye on the tropics heading towards the beginning of August, which I can't believe is almost here. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of talk about this tropical wave, which is moving across the Atlantic now. So let's start first with the wide view of the Atlantic here. Hurricane Hannah, quite a storm, intensified rapidly in the Gulf of Mexico, made landfall in southern Texas. Thankfully, not impacting a huge population, but flash flooding a big concern there. That will be an issue for the next day or so as there's flooding there. Gonzalo dissipated into a tropical wave, but all the talk now, and social media is going to be lighting up, trust me, you'll see a lot of crazy stuff. I'm here to kind of give you the nuts and bolts of what to think about, what to worry about, and what not to worry about. But here's our tropical wave. Big swirl out there in the middle of the Atlantic. Let's zoom in a little bit closer. The circulation center looks to be right here, but you can see the thunderstorms are really displaced. This is a very broad circulation, and that's kind of important early on because we don't know where the actual center will form because it could get tucked down here, it could reform up here, it could form here. So when you start looking at model guidance, just remember they're all picking a different spot where they think the circulation is going to form. And long range, the big issue is going to be wherever that circulation forms is going to dictate the long range model guidance. So I'm going to show you all the spaghetti just to lay it out there for you. Here's a look at the spaghetti plot. So all of them. Notice they're pretty tightly clustered right now, and they're taking on the typical recurvature pattern. So you typically see storms out here that develop, really most of them end up recurving. But as we know, some don't, and those tend to be pretty significant hurricanes. But honestly, statistically, most storms that form out there, because they're out there so long, they tend to recurve. So you're starting to see kind of a pattern here, and everybody in the Carolinas is starting to freak out a little bit. But I will caution you, look at the big spread in the guidance. That's a huge spread. So, if you live in Myrtle Beach or you live in Hilton Head or the Outer Banks or, anywhere on the east side of Florida, immediately you're subconsciously you're going, uh-oh, I got to watch this. But mathematically, scientifically, the chance of it being here and here are equal. So don't freak out yet, but certainly this is a storm we need to watch. Now, this is called Invest 92L. If you're not familiar with the terminology, that's Investigation Area 92L. We use that to kind of track them before they get a name. And this is going to have an interesting name. It's a Spanish name. It's Isaias, I believe is the correct pronunciation. I've been basically practicing for days, and thank you to all my Latin speaking friends for giving me some help with this, but it's Isaias. So I really love the name, actually, the more I say it, but that would be the name of this storm, Isaias, moving towards the west and eventually getting into the Caribbean. Now, there's a lot of things that can happen with this system as it moves to the west. If it forms further south, it could continue moving west like Gonzalo. It could get in the Gulf of Mexico, and it could recurve. But what if it impacts all of the big islands in the Caribbean? Bad news for Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. But that tends to also break up the storm. So there's a lot of things still to watch here. That's why there's nothing really set in stone. I'm going to show you some more guidance here that will set things up a little bit. I love looking at the track density of the ensembles. So what you're looking at here is the European ensembles and the GFS ensemble. Now, the GFS is showing more of a recurvature, but a couple of these moving off to the west. And just notice the spread. It's pretty big right here. So this is what I like to call, hey, we need to watch this, but not freak out kind of thing. Also, if you look at the European, kind of the same thing. Pretty large spread, but a couple more going into the Gulf of Mexico. One word of caution. Now, typically you'll hear me be very cautious of long-range guidance. You're talking about 5 days, 6 days from now, this being over here. That's pretty far out. So 7 days, it's here. 10 days, it's here. 14 days, it's up here. So we're talking really way out into the future here, right? And normally model guidance, you got to be very wary of. Well, in the time of COVID, we've got something else to take into account. There are far fewer flights. And you may not understand, but most commercial airlines are collecting weather data every time they fly. They take off and land. So that upper air data is missing. And some of the recent studies have shown this has degraded the model guidance just a little bit, but enough that we've noticed. And so the fact that the guidance is a little squirrely in the long range and the fact that it's so far out anyways, even with perfect data, always makes me like, ooh, we need to pay attention to this a little more careful and not get caught up in this long range guidance because of that lack of upper air data. So hopefully we'll get a hurricane hunter out there probably in 4 or 5 days. Once it gets closer to the windward islands, we'll have some better data. But right now, just something to think about in the back of your mind. Hey, the model guidance, especially long range, probably isn't as good as it normally is because of that lack of commercial air traffic collecting upper air data, especially over the United States, which was actually highlighted in the study I saw. The United States is actually having a huge issue with some of its upper air data because of that. So we'll see how that affects it long range, but just something to keep in the back of your mind. So what's going to happen long range? Well, let's look at the water vapor loop first. The thing that controls almost everything in the Atlantic is the big Bermuda Ridge, which is, usually in the middle of the Atlantic right there. That is going to eventually steer this thing west. It's either going to recurve around it, it's going to recurve here, or it's going to keep going west. Those are all possibilities. So it all depends on the position of that guy right there. So let's look at some of the guidance based on that. I'm going to show you the European because I tend to trust it with the upper air pattern, at least long range. So you can see this giant ridge. It stretches across the U.S. Every once in a while there's a weakening in it, but I want you to see what happens over time. So think of the Isaias is right here. So Isaias is right there, moving to the west. There's our ridge to the north. And you see the movement to the west. What we need to watch for is what does the ridge do? If it continues to move with it, it's going to keep it chugging off to the west. Now, you see a weakness develop there, but it's still back here, probably not going to get there. So that weakness probably won't grab it, but it could. Something to keep an eye on. We'll go through time. You see that weakness is still there, right there. You see it? And here's our system down here. So we go further into time. So this thing is like a big cog, like a gear. It's spinning like this, so it's trying to pick this thing up. So there's some opportunity for that recurvature. That's why I think you're seeing some of that in the guidance. But one of the things about tropical systems, if they form far enough south or they're a little bit stronger, they tend to not get steered as easily from that. So it might stay further south. So that's why I said where the actual low-level circulation forms, if it forms further north, it could get picked up sooner. If it forms farther south, I should say, it could stay south longer. So those are all things that we don't know yet. Remember, this thing has not even formed yet. That's probably one thing we should remember as well. We don't even have a defined system yet. So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves in some instances about where we think this thing is going to be in 10 to 14 days. So we go through time, and I'll show you what the European's showing. It's showing the ridge building west. And I can actually see the weakness associated with the Isaias right there. There's our high. So it's still moving to the east. I'm going to remove that. We'll go through time. You can see the ridge getting stronger. There's our system approaching the windward eye. Notice the time. This is next Wednesday. So based on this guidance, we also notice another wave coming off the coast of Africa. So, we're in the middle of hurricane season getting in here. So we go through time all the way through next Thursday. There's our system over the Caribbean, and look at the ridge to the north. At least the European is defining a pretty strong ridge here like this. So in this case, the preference would be to keep going west. And again, we stop here because it only goes out 90 hours, but that's kind of the thinking right now. And remember, this is next Thursday, or next Wednesday night into Thursday morning, and the storm is only here. So I'm getting a lot of questions of people, hey, I got a beach trip next week. Hey, this thing isn't going to be anywhere near our coast next week. You're talking the following weekend, maybe at the earliest, but the week after. So if you got plans at the coast next week, this system isn't going to be the one that impacts you. So I wouldn't get too worried about this Isaias right now because it just doesn't look like that's going to be the one that is going to cause us issues. I really think it's going to be something else. If we're going to see something else, it's going to be something homegrown that forms there. And speaking of that, I'll go back to the wider view here. As we still got some tropical waves. We got a little swirl off the east coast. We got a little cluster of clouds there. And we have the remnants of Gonzalo there. So while we get caught up here, don't let your guard off for something here and something else developing off the coast. So I guess the thing I'll tell you right now is this is something to watch, but we're certainly not at any kind of freak out stage. We don't really know long range where this thing is going. When you look at the spread and the guidance, that's huge. Obviously, everyone in the southeast and the Gulf and East Coast is going to pay attention to this because Isaias, once it forms, we'll have a better idea where it's going. But right now, we're certainly not at any freak out stage. We're certainly more at a let's watch where we typically are during the height of hurricane season. I will be posting vlog updates probably daily for the next couple of days as we keep an eye on this. And if anything changes, I'll post it right here on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Have a great Sunday, everybody.